Hey guys, Pat here. So let's talk about Colin Trevorrow getting fired, and I'm going to use the word fired, of Star Wars Episode 9. Now, the press release that Lucasfilm put out there was that it was a mutual parting of the ways. We've heard this before going back to the Han Solo movie. First reports were, oh, Lord and Miller and Kathleen Kennedy and everyone involved agreed that we're going to part ways. We were having creative differences. Then we found out later through a lot of sources that I think were more than reliable. We found out that Lord Miller were actually fired and didn't get along with Kathleen Kennedy from the beginning, which is fine. That's a different story altogether to talk about the surreal nature of that. That there was only 3 weeks of shooting left to do, and then Lord and Miller got let go, and then Ron Howard was brought in. There's been rumors that the lead actor needs acting coaches because he was giving an Ace Ventura-like performance. The movie was too comedic. And after this, a big debate started to circulate whether or not Colin Trevorrow would, or is it Trevorrow or Trevorrow? I'm not sure. I'm going to say Trevorrow. The debate whether he would stay on Episode 9 because he had the film Book of Henry come out, and it got terrible reviews. I think it got like 24% on Rotten Tomatoes or something like that, maybe a little better than that, and it bombed. It made $4 million at the box office. Now, I didn't think Book of Henry would affect him that much, really, because really, the reason Disney hired him, I totally get it. If you watch the guy's work on Jurassic World, he's clearly a guy that you can hire as a producer, give him some storyboards, and say, "Hey, go shoot this movie the way I want you to shoot it, and it'll make 1.6 billion." That's exactly what happened. Him being the filmmaker is not what made Jurassic World a hit, and anyone who thinks that is just living in denial. It was the property itself, Chris Pratt being in that movie right after Guardians of the Galaxy, and they basically just needed a director to come in and make the movie. But this is very strange news because at the same time, a lot of people thought this was going to get announced a while ago if that was going to happen, if Book of Henry was affecting Lucasfilm keeping him on or not. Due to some horrible critical reception. And really the only film he has in his filmography that's got really good reviews is Safety Not Guaranteed. His other two films, even Jurassic World, got pretty mediocre reviews. It got okay reviews, but Lucasfilm wants something more to Force Awakens. Now, honestly, looking back, I actually think Jurassic World's probably just as good of a movie and has all of the same flaws and pluses and of that Force Awakens has. I think Jurassic World is actually a very similar movie, but that's opinion. That doesn't really matter as much. It's just very weird that Disney has been having a track record with this, right? They get rid of Josh Trank because of Fantastic Four, and I guess Simon Kinberg, they said, was telling them that it was a bad idea to work with this guy. Gareth Edwards is not involved with the reshoots on Rogue One done by Tony Gilroy. Someone comes in and pretty much redoes his movie, a lot of the third act, which did sound like it needed work. Gareth Edwards then comes back to shoot the one Darth Vader sequence at the end of the movie, the action set piece at the end. He comes back to direct that. So that was a little weird at the time, but I thought, well, Gareth Edwards, his Godzilla wasn't that great. His Monsters isn't that great. He's not great with actors and dialogue. He's all an effects, cinematography, set design guy. He's all aesthetics. Very talented in that regard. He actually makes very good-looking movies. Rogue One, I thought, was a much better-looking movie than Force Awakens on a technical level, and from just a lighting level, I actually thought it looked a lot better. I think a lot of that had to do with the way they shot it and the lenses they used, actually, as compared to Abrams, what he did with the film and everything that he shot. I think they shot on 35mm film, and on Force Awakens, it didn't look as good as I was expecting going into the movie. I was expecting a lot more from that. It wasn't as engrossing, immersive as a film as I was hoping. And then we have Lord and Miller, who are coming off highly successful films. You have the 2122 Jump Street, Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs, the Lego Movie, all well reviewed, all box office hits. These guys are like wonderkins. They're the boys of Hollywood. They're the next big thing. Well, then we find out they're making a movie in the same vein of the other films they made, which were comedies and spoofs. So I don't even know why Disney hired them. And here we are with Colin Trevorrow, who directed this really good independent low-budget flick that I liked quite a bit. I think Safety Not Guaranteed is actually a gem. I love that movie. But it's not like it's brilliantly done from a special effects cinematography standpoint. It's more character driven and driven by its script. It does have a couple moments of visual wonder, but for the most part, it's kind of a sweet little love story. And Trevorrow seems to be very good at that, at the small scale stuff. I'm not saying he's a bad action director and can't do set pieces and blockbusters, but I just don't even think that's where his heart lies. In the same way Gareth Edwards could make big special effects sequences for the studio, and then Tony Gilroy had to come in and kind of structure the film better and give it a little bit more characterization. I think Colin, on the other end, shows a strength to do characters and dynamics between characters when he has the right material. I just don't think he's a very good filmmaker when it comes to really putting a film together, all the pieces to it and tone. Because Jurassic World to me was just a big ball of mediocre. Although I thought Force Awakens was extremely mediocre too, and it got rave reviews. So I don't know. I remember when I walked out of Force Awakens, I was like, how did that get twice as good of reviews basically as Jurassic World? Although Jurassic World's a really stupid movie, but I'm talking about my feelings. It's tough here because it affects it. It affects how Disney is making these movies and how I have my perspective on them. Because I didn't think Colin Trevorrow was a good choice. I thought it was a very shallow choice. Let's have him come in and direct the third film, and it felt oddly similar to Return of the Jedi. We have J.J. Abrams doing New Hope, basically this first movie that's the safest one, the one that gets people in the theaters. That's pure escapism. Then you have Rian Johnson coming in for the darker sequel, the more complex sequel, The Empire Strikes Back, if you will, like Irvin Kershner. And then you have the third film, which is directed by a guy that feels like Lucas just hired so he could ghost direct half of it or let ILM direct it, and a guy who didn't really have a signature style, Richard Marquand, I think so you say his name, Marquand, and Colin Trevorrow. So that part's all hilarious to me, the pattern of how him being chosen felt like Return of the Jedi. But I thought they were going to let him go. I thought they were going to let him go even before Book of Henry. That's what I want to bring up. People kept saying Book of Henry, and there was rumors coming out at the time that they were looking at him then. But when I heard about Lord and Miller, I said that day, I said Colin Trevorrow is probably no longer going to be on Episode 9. Because I think this is what it is. Kathleen Kennedy is cleaning house. I think they realized they overreached. They decided they were going to make way too many movies too fast. They started doing these Star Wars stories. And I'm not even saying Kathleen Kennedy's to blame her. People want to go after Kathleen Kennedy. She's an established producer that's been working on great films and great franchises for a long time. She knows what she's doing. For better or worse, that Lord and Miller film, even if it would have been a great comedy, probably wasn't going to be a very good Star Wars film to market out there. It would have been very tough to sell that movie. Although I think I kind of get what Lord and Miller were trying to do with it from what I've read about it, but I get why a studio wouldn't want to release that movie. Same thing with Rogue One. Sounded like it was a very dark, emotionless film that just was kind of action-driven, and then Tony Gilroy came in and gave it a little bit of suspense and character. And I like Rogue One quite a bit. I think it's a pretty decent flick. It's not a great movie, mind you, but it's a decent movie. And a step in the right direction. And I love Rian Johnson. I find the Looper screenplay highly flawed, but I love his work on Brick, his work on Breaking Bad, The Brothers Bloom. Very good director. Great choice, actually. Terrific choice for Star Wars. I think he's actually probably going to come back and direct Episode 9. Because here's what I'm talking about, this overreaching thing. I think when they were pitching this, they thought they could do the Marvel thing where, okay, we'll have a bunch of movies going on that set up our Avengers flicks, basically, even though these aren't setup flicks, and we can produce a movie or two movies a year. We can just hire up-and-coming directors that are really talented or guys who never got their big shot. And except for J.J. Abrams, who was the safest pick in the whole universe. But they could have been like, all right, let's do that. And the strange thing about it is that they hired J.J. Abrams out of the gate. He moved on. They brought in Rian Johnson. They hired Trevorrow. They started making all these spin-off films. Then we start hearing Josh Trank's involved. We start hearing that Gareth Edwards is involved. We're hearing now Ron Howard comes in. I think we're going to see more Ron Howards. I think we're going to get more veteran directors coming into this franchise. And that really should have been there from the beginning. And I'm not saying that with any insulting manner to these directors who worked on these films. They are young, they are inexperienced, and they're working in a very calculated franchise that has a very specific tone and set of set pieces and comedic tone and and just a pace to it and everything that they need to sell to a worldwide audience, a global audience. Not every director can come in and just do that easily, even if you're a really good filmmaker. You can't just come in and do that easily. It's there's some guys that are better at that than other guys. Like Jon Favreau, for instance, is very good at going in and making a studio flick for the most part. He can go in and get it done, take the notes, make it on time, on budget, and really hit all the beats they want him to hit. There's directors like that. I don't think Colin Trevorrow is that guy necessarily. Now, people are going to argue, well, Jurassic World was that film, and I can get that argument, but I think what they're going to need to do with episode 9 is have something that they can be more reliant on, which is why I think Rian Johnson would be the right choice, because he wrote episode 8, he's directing it. You bring him back on board, he's already familiar with the actors coming off episode 8, he's been talking to them, he knows the characters, he knows who they are, at least his version of them, and then he can go into the next film coming off that way of work. Instead of bringing in a new director who's got to bring his own thing to the table. And apparently Trevorrow was working on a script, and they brought in another writer, and they didn't like what he was writing, Colin. So that probably had a lot to do with it, too. They maybe just didn't like his ideas. I think the smart choice would be to try and get Rian Johnson back. Like, here's the money. They're probably waiting to see how Last Jedi does, if Last Jedi gets great reviews and does as well. Because I think Last Jedi is going to do less than Force Awakens, though that's nothing negative. The film's going to be a huge hit. And critically, we don't know where it's going to fall. You would assume it would get better reviews than Force Awakens, but I don't know if a lot of that movie's positivity was pure hype at the time, and I think it was, because since that movie's come out, there's been a lot of criticism thrown at it, and Rey for being a very boring protagonist her merchandise isn't even selling. There's just Rey stuff everywhere on the shelves because Rey's a boring character. She didn't catch the imagination of this generation like they thought she would because they didn't put a lot of effort into writing her. But if Rian Johnson can make her a great character with his writing and great dialogue, and he can improve on that, then you have a movie franchise. You really do. Empire Strikes Back made the characters more interesting. Han Solo, I think, became more interesting, and Empire became more three-dimensional. I think Carrie Fisher's performance improved greatly, and so did Mark Hamill's acting. The acting got better. If this film has better acting from Oscar Isaac and John Boyega and Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver, and it has better dialogue than Force Awakens, instead of like, let's go over here, oh, an explosion, oh, that. I know Star Wars films have never had great dialogue throughout. It's always been to the point, but I still want better dialogue. I still want better I think every movie should try to improve off what they had before. They shouldn't go into Last Jedi and say, hey, let's just do what we did with Force Awakens again. It's like, no, we got to do better. That should be the goal of any film series like that when you're going into it. But like I said, I think they did too much at once. I think they thought they could produce a movie every year, and they could do this trilogy at the same time. And what that did is they didn't really focus on the trilogy enough, and the team they brought in of directors and writers to form that, because they're busy producing so much stuff, and that's why you have a Lord and Miller situation where it gets out of control, and Gareth Edwards getting replaced. Marvel doesn't have these situations that much. People like to bring up Ant-Man, but that was before they started filming. Okay, typically when they go into filming a Marvel movie, the director's on board with what kind of movie they want to make with the studio. And I think Disney's not that hands-on with a lot of what Marvel does. I think Disney might be too hands-on with Star Wars. They might be too delicate. They're going to kill the brand. They're going to hurt the brand from where it was in Force Awakens, because if you keep having these negative news stories come out that you're firing directors and you're changing things up, it's going to make people worry. And then if the films come out and they're not great movies, like what if Han Solo is mediocre or just okay? That's not really good for the brand. And a lot of people went to go see Force Awakens to see Han Solo and Leia and Luke again, and we didn't get that, which is fine. But then Rogue One, I think, was sold very much on Darth Vader in the trailers, even though he's not in the movie much. The Death Star again. We're seeing a lot of familiar things they're selling us on. Can they sell a movie without the Empire and the Death Star and the universe we know and the characters we know? I'd argue they really couldn't. That's the gamble with these films that aren't featuring big characters. That's why they want to do Boba Fett. That's why they want to do Jabba the Hutt. They don't want to take a risk on anything because they know they're going to have a hard time pulling it off. I don't think they could pull off something like a Guardians of the Galaxy in the sense of how that stood out in the Marvel films. I don't think they could pull off something like a Winter Soldier. I don't think it's really there. Rogue One, I think, was kind of the Winter Soldier to Force Awakens Avengers. But we got to look at this. It's worrisome that Disney behind the scenes is having or Lucasfilm in particular, is having this much chaos, because you would want from the beginning for them to sit down and have a plan for these films, to go, this is what Force Awakens is, this is what it's going to lead into. I remember Abrams talking about him and Kasdan walked around for hours and would come up with all these ideas. I don't believe that. I don't think they did come up with a lot of ideas, because when you watch Force Awakens, you're like, this is what you came up with, talking all the time about new things, like restructuring a film around the plot structure of New Hope, and just bringing in characters that are more Avatar characters, bland, heroic stereotypes from previous characters, instead of being new, original, interesting characters, outside of maybe Kylo Ren being kind of a unique take on something we haven't seen before. And then they don't have the plan for the next film. I think it's so obvious now that J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan did not know what Episode 8 was going to be. And a lot of that mystery and stuff that they left open in Episode 7, they pretty much just handed off to Rian Johnson. And if Johnson can pull that off, then he's definitely the guy for Episode 9. And that's the thing we know about it. They didn't have really a full idea of what the script was and the idea of the movie was on Rogue One. They always have these reshoots thought out. Force Awakens had a bunch of reshoots. Rogue One had a bunch of reshoots. Now they have all these reshoots on the Han Solo movie. The budgets are shooting up on all these movies. It's getting ridiculous. I mean, quite frankly, it's getting ridiculous that it's like every other week we're hearing a new Star Wars story. So my advice would be, the Ron Howard thing should have been where they started from. They should have immediately said, let's hire guys who can come in and do these kinds of films, stay on point with what we want, we can agree a lot easier, someone in-house that we can work with. Because you can't just go out of the gate and go with the Russo brothers. I think that's what they're hoping for, or one of those moments. You're not going to get that. It's better to go with the Ron Howards or the Guillermo del Toros, or just the guys that have been around like over 10 years, not even 20 years, honestly, but the guys have been around a long time that have experience, or at least have made a few movies that were big budget films, a few blockbusters. They didn't make one indie film like Gareth Edwards and Colin, and then one big budget film with, and then that's the film. You're like, oh, well, that did well, so let's give them a Star Wars movie. It's a really lazy way to choose directors. It doesn't seem like they're picking directors based off much outside of, oh, well, they had one hit movie. Rian Johnson's the only one that's kind of interesting, where it's like, huh, that's cool you went out of the box and picked that guy. Hasn't really made a big, like, even Looper wasn't a big budget movie. It cost $30 million. Like, you went with that guy, you said, this is the guy we're going to hand the franchise to. Which I think is going to result in Last Jedi being a more interesting film than Force Awakens. It doesn't feel like filmmakers are working on this. It feels like a committee's making these movies, which I get, but if you're going to do that, then hire committee directors who can play that game, who understand the baseball of it. Don't go with these guys who probably are some young filmmaker that has some vision of the kind of Star Wars film they want to make, and they're never going to be able to make with Disney. You're just not going to make that film. You're not going to be able to make an R-rated Rogue One war film. You're not going to be able to make a Han Solo film that's a goofy spoof comedy mocking Star Wars, sending it up. You can't do that at Disney, okay? It's not going to happen. So, either with Episode 9, they need to try to get Johnson back or Abrams, or they need to go with an experienced director. I think Del Toro's a good choice because he's coming off The Shape of Water right now, which is very acclaimed. It's his best reviewed film since Pan's Labyrinth. And you have a lot of choices out there like that. There's a lot of big name directors, the Jon Favreaus, the Brad Birds, the Joss Whedon types, even though I don't think Whedon's aesthetics would be great, but he did do Firefly and Serenity and that. There's a lot of guys out there that have made their mark on some really big films and have shown they can do it more than once. And those are the guys I think you should bring in to handle the main series films. I get why they're getting these younger guys and these guys who have, although I guess Lord and Miller really proved themselves, but they're getting guys who kind of, I don't know, they have their own thing. They have their own signature style. I don't know if Star Wars necessarily was that. Like Ron Howard as a choice makes a lot of sense because of the kind of filmmaker he is. I think you need that classic Hollywood aesthetic. It's why Abrams worked so well for the box office and success, because he came in and he made that kind of film that audiences want to see. That little kids want to see and old people want to see. He made a crowd pleaser. But you can't just keep making crowd pleasers over and over again. Marvel does that. But with Star Wars, a lot of it is the mythology, it's the characters, it's the universe, it's the world we want to see. We had to wait years to get new Star Wars films. For a while, it was only it was originally those 3 films. Then we got the prequels, and merchandise didn't come out all the time. You had to wait for something new. Now I feel like we're already oversaturated with Star Wars, and kids aren't going to grow up with that excitement like they had before. And the sense of wonder and discovery is going to be gone. It's just going to be, oh, there's another Star Wars film coming out. This is the 12th one in a row. You know, we're going to get to that point. How long can they go before they make a bad movie? Like something like a Thor 2 or an Iron Man 2, one of those movies that's mediocre and really affects the brand. Thing with Marvel, though, is they can always bounce back with that because then they have an Avengers in their pocket. If you make a bad Star Wars story film, that hurts the brand in a much more serious way, in my opinion, than Marvel. As Marvel has all these comic books and things to draw back from, and it feels like Disney isn't pulling much from the EU, and they could give a crap about what the fans have been reading for years and what's been established through comic books and novels and all that. Which is, whatever, that's fine. They don't have to follow that stuff, but if they're making it up as they go along, which sounds like that's what they're doing, like they made up Force Awakens as they went along. They went into Last Jedi not really knowing what it was going to be until Johnson wrote a screenplay. They don't have an idea of what Episode 9 is yet, and this film's shooting in a few months. It's ridiculous. Get yourself together. Quit trying to produce a movie a year. Take some time on these movies. Let them breathe. Develop the next film as a movie. Work on it. Make sure it's good. And then go on to it. People will wait for Star Wars films. We don't need a yearly Star Wars film. I will wait for the next film in the franchise for 2 to 3 years, if not longer, for a really good movie. When you do this yearly thing, it's going to be like, well, how long is that going to go until I walk out of one of those movies? And it's like, I'm probably not going to go see the next one. That's always a fear that Disney needs to keep in line. Lucasfilm needs to keep in line. They're way overreaching here. Because the thing with the Marvel films, when you make Ant-Man or Guardians of the Galaxy, you are taking something from the comic books, at least characters, and building from that. When you're doing these Star Wars stories like Rogue One, you're trying to come up with these original ideas. Or even a Han Solo movie. Then you have to come up with what a Han Solo movie is. What kind of film is it? How is the screenplay written? What does point A to point B? And Lawrence Kasdan isn't the same guy when he wrote Han Solo in the 80s that he is now. He's not the same writer. He's not the same man. A lot of things change, and that's the difficult part, is that I don't think Kathleen Kennedy and them, who the old-timers, are adjusting to the change of things. I don't think, it's a faster Hollywood. It's a quicker, movies are getting made a lot faster. They have set release dates more now than they ever did before. When you're trying to meet that release date, you don't get a lot of time to be creative. And I think they need to drop the release date. It's not the Marvel thing where you got to give us a comic book film every year. People will wait for Star Wars. Give it time. Develop these projects. Hire the right directors. Wait till the screenplay's fleshed out and written before you go into shooting. And then when you go into that first day of filming, everybody knows what the movie is. And then, yeah, if it's great or just okay, depends on what happens on the filming and the set and the actors and all that. But you shouldn't go in not knowing what you're doing beforehand. And it sounds like they're going into some of these movies, including Episode 9, and they don't have a fine idea of what it is yet. That's ridiculous. Why didn't you plan out the 3 films? Why didn't you plan out whose vision it was? Whose vision is this? Is it Kathleen Kennedy's vision? Is it Disney's vision? It can't be J.J. Abrams' vision. Whose vision are these new Star Wars films? That's what I don't get. You could say about the original films, but they were George Lucas's vision and Lawrence Kasdan. There was clearly a collaborative process between certain people that really showed in the original trilogy. I'm not feeling that so far in these Star Wars films. And my biggest fear is that we're going to get 1 or 2 of them that are going to be mediocre or really bad. And I don't want Star Wars to die off like that. I don't want the brand to get hurt, but they're not taking risks in the right way, and then they're playing it too safe in other ways. They're too safe with the main films, and then the risks they're taking are ridiculous. Lord and Miller are probably never a good choice to begin with. That was really just kind of a bad idea. Why would you hire 2 comedy directors to make a Han Solo film the way you want to make it, like this Western? Why would you hire those guys who made the Lego movie? It just doesn't make sense. I don't get the way that they're choosing directors. Maybe a lot of directors who are more auteurish, like Edgar Wright or the Christopher Nolan types and that, don't want to go work for Lucasfilm because they're controlled. But that's where guys like Abrams come in, who can do those kinds of movies, who can work within the studio system and still make a product that fits into the Abrams canon of his style. I don't know. I'm very baffled by this whole thing. I knew Colin was going to get fired. I felt it months ago. Mutually parting ways, I mean. And I'm not going to go after Kathleen Kennedy. I was very harsh on her in my last video when I talked about Han Solo. But more at this, I'm just blaming everyone involved who's at the head of this Star Wars franchise. They need to slow down. Slow down. Breathe. Take time. You're making these movies way too fast, and you clearly don't have a vision of where they're going to go. You don't have your Kevin Feige who's, got this stuff really thought out. He has this puzzle box figured out, and he has an encyclopedia knowledge of the Marvel comic book lore. So he can just be like, hey, let's do this. And, he knows films. He's like, hey, James Gunn, he's great for this. I don't feel like Disney's not thinking that way. I don't think they have that creative producer. Kathleen Kennedy's a really good producer, but I don't know if she's that creative. I don't know if they're not really picking creative people to make these movies, and they're not announcing creative movies. A Yoda film, a Boba Fett film, an Han Solo film. Those are all the most generic fan servicey ideas anyone could think of. Say what you will about Rogue One, but at least that was a, somewhat of an idea. It didn't have like canon characters. It's like, hey, it's about these people we've never seen before going and trying to get the Death Star plans. At least it had that. So I'm going to pick a couple choices I think they could actually get. Because a lot of people are throwing names out there like Denis Villeneuve and stuff, and I don't think he's going to ever come in to do a Star Wars film because he wouldn't get enough control over it. And I don't think he's interested in making films that aren't more adult-driven unless they give him a lot of creative control. They're throwing out names out there I don't think they could get. I'm going to throw out a couple names that I've heard thrown out there that I do think they could get. Joe Johnston, who did The Rocketeer in the first Captain America flick in October Sky. He's been in the business a long time. He's worked with a lot of these people. He has a very good eye. He's a very good technical director. He could come in and do... if they had a really good screenplay, he would be a fine choice. I think Joe Johnston's it's a little bit of a safe choice, but it's a solid choice. And it would be a good idea. That way you wouldn't have to worry about the visual effects and all that stuff. The guy... And he showed with the first Captain America flick, he can make a modern movie still in the vein of his older films and keep that tone and spirit of his films. And I think it would fit Star Wars. I have no problem with that. I've heard a lot of people throw out Ava DuVernay. I've heard some people throw out Edgar Wright and all that stuff. People I don't think are ever going to sign on to these Star Wars films. I just don't see it. Matt Reeves is out there. I don't think Matt Reeves is going to have time to come in and work on this because he's working on the Batman. The Wachowskis, though, I've heard that name thrown around. I'm actually into that idea. Even though they've become horrible at directing actors. Wachowski's Episode 9, man. It's kind of cool. Once again, I don't see them working with the studio like that. They like having control, like big time. So I'm thinking Joe Johnston or... God, I really don't want to go with the Ron Howard type, but I'd say the safe bet, Joe Johnston or a Guillermo del Toro. If you want to go more visuals and creativity in that, go with the del Toros. If you want to play it safe, crowd pleaser, maybe Joe Johnston. You just have those choices. You really do, and that's the idea I think you should have. I think, unless you can't get Rian Johnson. If you can get Rian Johnson, just go with that, I honestly think, because that makes sense. And honestly, now it's looking like maybe they should have had the same director do all three movies. Maybe Abrams directed and Rian Johnson wrote on the screenplays for all three flicks. So Lawrence Kasdan was only there for Force Awakens, and then he wasn't involved with the writing on Episode 8. He went to go do the Han Solo movie. So I don't know why from the beginning they didn't say, okay, these are three films by one director, because they're trying to do that thing that happened in the original trilogy, but that was more organic. Lucas never planned not to direct Empire Strikes Back. He went through a bad divorce. He got really burnt out. He got overwhelmed making Star Wars. And he became more of a producer. So when he brought in Irvin Kershner, which was a unorthodox choice, that really helped. And then he did the same thing in Return of the Jedi. That wasn't a plan. It just happened naturally. This seems like it was planned. Like they didn't go in with any kind of concept. Like, well, F it, we'll just hire a new director for each movie. Instead of thinking, whose vision of Star Wars do we want to do? Even if you hate J.J. Abrams and you're mixed on him, and I could certainly get that for sure. Why didn't they give him I don't know why didn't you get a director who would stick around? Why'd you get a guy who jumped ship after he was on a movie that made $2 billion? It's weird. It's very weird. It's like Joss Whedon, it's like if he'd have left after the first Avengers, not Age of Ultron. Typically, it's not what we're used to, and I figure Rian Johnson, if Last Jedi is good, then the safe bet has to be just offering him a crap load of money and saying, please come back. It'll help the press release, because then they could say, oh, we always wanted Rian. We love Last Jedi so much. We didn't get rid of Colin because he wasn't great. Just Rian is so good, we want to keep him. That'll be a good way to save face instead of just bringing in a new director altogether, and then people have to adjust to that, and that's a big news story. Kudos to Lucasfilm for making these press releases sound very good, despite clearly there's something going on behind the scenes over there. But hey, if Kathleen Kennedy has to do this, if they have to do this to make films that are going to deliver at the box office like the previous two films did, then that's what it is. So like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and guys, Please rewind your VHS tapes before you take them back to the store. It's a real hassle for the employees to do it. Have a little courtesy.